Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind Body broadcast with Austin and Marty, and we are back with another episode in our body part series. And today we're going to talk about lower body, specifically quads, hamstrings. I would like to dive into adductors, glutes, all that good stuff. And yeah, there's quite a bit here, so we're going to kind of play it by ear and see how it goes. But where would you like to start, Marty?
Oh gosh, where would I like to start? You know what? Let's put the big guy out of the way. We'll do the quads first. Let's dive in there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so with quads, I think what we want to do here is we want to establish a few things: activation of the muscle, range of motion the proper range of motion to put it through, and also, obviously exercise selection. So I think worth mentioning with quads, I would say quads even more so than hamstrings is the structure and bone structure of the person. There's going to be some exercises and like foot placement and things of that nature that are going to be a little more suited for you versus somebody else, potentially because of like the length of your femur, for example, or the length of the lower leg. So,
yeah.
you know, there are people that are just going to feel extremely awkward doing something like a barbell squat.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there are going to be people that feel really good doing something like a barbell squat.
Yeah.
So I think it's first important to establish those parameters first. And there's some basic things that I noticed that probably the biggest difference I see is the femur length makes quite a difference in what somebody feels or how an exercise feels, because it's not that you
Yeah.
can't do an exercise, you just might need to set it up differently.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so your shorter femur people are normally people that I tend to notice do well with squatting.
Exactly.
Yeah, a squat feels good to them. They get, hypertrophy from a squat. They get good activation from a squat. They can perform it well. Um, and then your longer femur people tend to be a little more awkward just because, as you're approaching that angle at the knee, your butt and your body's so far extended away from your knees because your femur's much longer that it just becomes a little awkward. So
Yep.
Now because since squat's probably the biggest heavy hitter and that's what people like to talk about, there's different ways that you can set that up as well.
Yeah.
Your low bar squats versus your high bar squats, and then there's a bunch of other different bars if you want to do safety bar squats and camber bar squats, and there's just different ways that you can do it. But generally your lower bar squats are going to be a little more hip dominant, and your higher bar squats are going to be a little more quad dominant.
Yeah.
And then of course there are front squats, which are going to be very quad dominant.
Yeah.
And all that has to do is just where the weight's distributed versus like over top of your body and over top of your spine. And now there's, and it will even vary person to person in how that feels, because I tend to feel good doing a low bar squat, but it still blows my quads up, which is completely contrary to what you would think
Yeah.
should happen.
Especially if all biomechanics are kind of in line, that's what should happen, right? Yeah.
Right. So I normally encourage people to kind of go through different bar positions and see what feels good to them, and they're going to figure out, what's going to give them the best activation. So what are some of the things you like to do in terms of squat cues?
Squat cues in terms of how to keep your squat technique go where it should,
Yeah,
or yeah.
I would say, what are some of the issues that you notice?
Oh, for sure. So would that definitely be staring up at the ceiling too much? So like we'll call it chin up.
Yeah.
Definitely. Even just really quickly talking about footwear, because I've seen this. There's a really good book out by Lon Kilgore called Anatomy with a Scalpel, and it's one of the first times I've seen the picture done with where they put, I think, tracking balls at the end of it and kind of videoed it, and where they watched the bar path. And any shoe with a rocker, which is generally what they call like what a runner would have, would be something called a rocker, where you will rock from the base towards the toe, and the toe is kind of lifted up, like as if you were to be on the balls of your feet running, you wouldn't be on a flat surface, you'd be on something more cushiony to push you forward and keep the toes up, so it just is a better anatomical position for running. But if you were on one of these, they're not flat, they oscillate. So it showed someone squatting in either like a squat shoe, which we talked about on the equipment episode, where it has got a little bit of a heel raise and goes down to a flat. Or there's something like a Chuck Taylor, which the powerlifters are huge fans of, which are pretty much just exactly that. They're flat. There's the Atomic shoes that I like to wear that are flat. So those won't have a bar oscillation. So if you look at a video of or pictures from the side, it will show the bar path going straight up and down for the most part in a flat shoed wearer, whereas in a shoe with a rocker that's meant to go do for running, the bar path will actually travel fairly aggressively back and forth, and it's not just like a couple centimeters. You're getting out there at inches, and that can not only dictate where the pressure is going to be in terms of on the knee, on the hip, on the ankle, but it can definitely change where you're going to feel the muscle as well. So I know it's not a cue, but it's something to have in your gym bag would be correct shoes for you, especially for, like Austin was saying, about your femur length. And then, yeah, definitely I would start out with the whole chin up thing. Like this isn't I don't want to blasphemize powerlifters and say they all do this, but definitely from what I saw locally there was local powerlifting coaches that would tell their clients to put their chins up, which I believe the rationale is to have the more hips driven forward. And that can work too, but it's when the neck is actually moved during the movement. Like let's say you come down into the squat, go down into the bottom, and then during the driving up, you jack your chin up at the same time. Not only can that move the bar path, it can move your elbows more forward, so now the bar can potentially roll on things. Not everyone's got monstrous traps like Austin to hold the bar in place. So this will happen. So that would be one of the things I like to say. Either you can look like straight ahead, or like one of the cues I was taught was kind of look at a spot out in front of you. I know a lot of gyms will have mirrors in front of them, which is fantastic. But kind of staring yourself in the eyes or whatever, sure, that could be fine. But it's anything, because that will definitely change if you're going to drive from your hips going up or driving from your hips going forward. So that would be one too. I've always been a big fan of keeping your thumbs on the same side as the bar, and the reason why I find that is that you can bring your elbows up a heck of a lot higher to keep the bar kind of in lock. I see so many people, especially during their high bar squats, is they almost kind of get lazy with their wrists, and their elbows will kind of drift more forward, and that's going to drift their weight more forward, causing a little bit of pressure on the knees. So that's what I like to watch for. I like to keep the elbows kind of jacked up a bit behind them, to hold the bar into place so it won't roll around as much. I was going to say nothing's worse, but yes, there are things worse. But it's never a good feeling to have that bar roll around on your neck and feel it kind of popping around on potential vertebrae or anything else. No, we don't want that feeling at all. Then also keeping the weight either on the midfoot or heel, depending upon how the person feels, because any time outside of well, actually, I don't know very many times. Maybe you can educate me on this, Austin, but I don't have any times where I'll want people putting pressure on the toes of their feet during the squat. It just, the easiest way to think about it during the squat and the leg press too, for the most part for me, and the easiest way to think about it is if you were to hold your hand out in front of you and you were put pressure on your fingers and you were pushed there versus you were to put pressure on the butt of your hand and say push there, not only A, where's the more power, or B, where's the wrist more safe? It's just like we talked about with, I believe, like the shoulders and the chest too, is that you want to keep your wrist straight when you're pushing the bar so that your joint stacking. Well, same thing with this too. Driving through the heels or the midfoot where the weight should be as opposed to the toes is going to solve a lot of your issues there. So just those would be my three biggest cues. Would be not drive and move your head around, look up, keep your thumbs on the other side of the same side of the bar as your fingers so you can keep your bar locked in place, and then keep all the weight on the midfoot or heel.
Yeah. I can't really think of a time where you would want to squat with your heels lifting.
Exactly, with your heels up for sure.
But it happens. I mean, that's actually probably one of the I would say probably for newer lifters, but just people that aren't very good at executing squats. And you know what? I've even seen it for people that have lifted for a long time, that the majority of the pressure is on the ball of their foot or their toe when they're coming up. And not only is it going to feel super freaking awkward, it's just not going to be very effective, and it's probably going to put too much pressure on your knees.
Yeah,
So,
it makes my knees cry when I see it happening too.
oh yeah, awful, terrible. It's about the worst thing you could do. I mean, the only there's only like, you could talk about something like a sissy squat where you intentionally drive your knees forward, but that's a little bit different.
That is
Um,
different. Yep.
right. But you mentioned the head position, and I know the head up thing was you would hear that so much, and then I know maybe I don't know if it was like a U.S. thing or just I don't know what it was, but then it was people just with their head like buried down. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They
Yep.
they took that they took it to the like opposite extreme where because what we're talking about here is your C spine, so it's your cervical spine, which is just the upper portion of your spine around your neck. Um, you want that neutral or close to neutral. Um, but that doesn't mean like it's going to be a little different for everyone. If you've got a slight arch in your neck, that's okay. It's as long as you're not like extreme one way or the other. I saw a good description of this. I believe it was maybe Dave Tate that talked about it, and something about tucking your head back, not really putting your chin up,
Okay.
and that feels good to me naturally. I can do like the head completely neutral or even down a little bit, but as the weight gets heavier, it feels more natural to me to tuck the head back a little bit because I'm keeping my upper back and everything very tight
Okay.
up, because that's part of the stabilization of a squat is in the upper back and in the elbow, in the elbow position, like you said, not
Yep.
letting your elbows travel too high up because of course you're going to pitch forward at that point.
Yes.
Um, yeah, because essentially the plane of your body and your elbows should be hopefully relatively parallel
You got it. Yeah.
to each other. So yeah, so those are some cues. And really, like if you take a perfect example is like if you the I have these old you were talking about shoes. Well, I have an old worn out pair of shoes that I squat in, but they're very flat. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've used them for so long that there's literally like a slight decline on the outside back corner where I'm pushing my knees out, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and weighting my feet on the outside and backwards. So if you look at like if you're squatting, especially through your warm-ups, if I'm squatting, I have 135 on the bar and I'm at the bottom, I can lift my toes up off the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I can pull my toes up off the floor. That's the position that I'm comfortable in. So if you can't do that, then chances are you're probably leaning forward too much or what have you. So
Yes, I agree. That was kind of
okay.
really quick. That was kind of two of the other ones. You just said them without, I think, even potentially knowing. But I've heard other trainers recommend like you should be able to wiggle your toes, which I didn't really like that one because I think that's putting a little bit too much on the brain. Like I don't want people thinking that I
Yeah,
should be wiggling my toes or toes up. And then the other
right.
one, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also depending upon the especially the width of the actually it doesn't really depend upon the width of the stance or how far the toes are pointed out, but just knees out. Exactly that. Knees like even just like especially personal training, like when I watch people squat and I see one of the most classic deviations of squat technique is people's knees caving in. So just
Yeah.
a quick loud knees out. Especially for geez, I think I said that for every single beginner that's never squatted when I came into my gym was knees out, just because that's such a natural thing to try to use more of the quads as opposed to the adductor, have them stabilize or anything else, right? So because it is like, and I can't like, especially being like online coaches like we are. I know it's a little bit slight bit off topic, but it's getting yourself a really good assessment on that too. Like I'll have clients video themselves squatting from the front, squatting from the back, squatting from the side, just so like you can get those cues then too, and give them the top two for the first minute, and then go from there because it's much easier to teach something from scratch than it is to break an old habit. So start from the beginning, especially with something big like that's technique oriented like the squat, and then once you get it, you should be fine.
What they call it? It's trying to think of the proper term for you, like biomechanics guys, knee valgus, right? Where
Yes.
the knee cave, and then I think it's the opposite. Oh shit! I think the opposite is like varus or something like that, where the knees are naturally out.
Yep.
Which you know what, like an easy way, well, not easy, but sometimes just looking at the person's gait pattern, like how they walk and how they stand,
Sure.
it's going to let you know if they're going to have a problem with that whole knees in, knees out thing
Yes.
a lot of the time. Just because it, that seems minuscule, but like I am a kind of a heel walker, and I've always been like that kind
Okay.
of a heel walker. I've, and also like I stand with my toes pretty straight or even slightly out. Whereas like if somebody, and that's also contributed to the way that my legs have developed. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like somebody with their knees, like I know some people that are slightly pigeon toed.
Yep.
They're probably going to have an issue with that. And they're also going to have an issue with certain aspects of quad development and certain knee issues and things like that. So people are going to have to be a little more conscious of that. And you can even do things if you really want to go really far with it. Like I've even had clients where I've suggested corrective orthotics for their
Absolutely.
shoes.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I mean, right there, and you'll know if it's helping because your legs and hips and knees and everything are going to be sore for initially as it corrects you. So, that's something you can typically get through like a chiropractor or physical therapist or something like that. And I don't know about, here you can typically get it covered through insurance too if your chiropractor writes you
Yep.
a referral for it. So
Same thing
I
here.
know,
Depending upon the like they're not free, but they're definitely depending upon which company you work for, what insurance you have. Yes.
yeah. So that's a good one. And then a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of foot pressure and knee grooves and things like that will carry over into a lot of the other movements, hack squats, leg presses.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
Although, we should mention before we move on to any other exercise, we got to talk about active range of motion,
Sure. Yeah.
especially on a squat.
You were just mentioning that, so you go for it. Yeah.
Especially on a squat. So the old debate of range of motion, ass to grass, whatever you want to call it, it's been beaten to death. And here's the thing: you're gonna, outside of people that have some serious mobility issues, that just their range of motion just really sucks. That's a separate issue. So if you're squatting down and you have really poor hip mobility, or you have such poor ankle mobility that you get you get like a quarter of the way down and your heels are lifting off the ground, that's a different issue. You need to work on those things separately.
Yes.
But anyone with relatively normal mobility, you need to squat in the range that requires tension throughout the entire range. And there's two spots. Obviously, standing up with your knees locked, there's still a little bit of tension, but not a lot because it transfers vertically to your joint some. But the other spot where there's not a lot of tension is when your ass is down touching your heels.
Yes.
So, or even, and for some people, not even that far. You don't even have to go that deep. It's really just that in range where you're getting like the tendon and ligament rebound off the bottom.
Yeah.
So there's just for hypertrophy, there's just really no reason to train in that range of motion. You just train down until you feel tension. Like I know for me personally, and for most people, you're gonna feel different muscles through different parts of the movement.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
as you get deeper, it's going to shift to hamstrings and glutes when you get deep enough. And that's about where you want to stop. There's just no reason to go any further than that, because at a point you're just going to kind of slump down. And then of course your lower back starts to round really badly at that point.
The butt wink. You got it.
Yep. You get the really bad butt wink at the bottom, which a little bit of butt wink is not like, I don't freak out about that if there's like the teeny tiny bit at the bottom, as long as everything looks pretty controlled.
As long as they don't bounce, right? As long as there's no bouncing in and out of the butt wink, I think that's when the issues can arise.
Right, for sure. Yeah, it's just a lot of time when you're talking about that ass to grass thing, you see one of two things: either they're bouncing, or they'll do like the like, oh, I'm doing pause squats. So I'm going to go, that's not a pause squat. A pause squat is not when you sit at the bottom when there's no tension. You're just like resting on your heels,
Yep. Yep.
Or resting on the back of your Achilles tendon with your butt. That's not a pause squat. That doesn't serve any purpose. Yeah, you're pausing, but you're not. You have no tension. So yeah, just training your active range of motion. You're going to know it. You're going to feel it. There's no reason to go past it at the bottom. There's plenty of people, and there's plenty of people that have great leg development that don't squat, down to their heels. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I never have. Because I just don't. That's just not what feels good to me. And my legs have always done better squatting to parallel, right around parallel, or even sometimes a little below, or sometimes even a little above, based on the exercise.
Yeah, I was just going to say I've had a girl that had outrageous glute development and hamstring development. The quads were actually causing her placings in shows to potentially start getting knocked down. So we would put her on a Smith and have her go not like quarter squats by any means, but definitely nothing below parallel. And then I would have her pay such diligent attention to, do you feel everything in the quads? And as soon as you feel anything go into your glutes or hamstrings, you went too low. But the one big stipulation I have on anyone that's going to doing these higher squats is especially the speed. Like, you've got to have that coming slow and under control, or else now the knees really will start taking a lot of that tension. Anything fast on the eccentric to me has never really been a big fan of, let alone on the squats. So that's but yeah, like, as in, will you destroy your knees at speed? If speed is good, no, but it's definitely the active range of motions for squats is completely different depending upon what muscles you're trying to use, and just like you're saying there. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're going to feel on that eccentric, if that's one of the easiest ways to have a controlled transition from that eccentric to concentric, is to actually control the eccentric to begin with.
You got it.
On the so, and of course, as the weight gets heavier, you almost are forced to, you can't at heavier squats. Like, you notice, you watch powerlifting especially, why do they go down so slow? It's like, well, they have to, because the weight is so heavy. You know what I mean? You can't, if not, you're just going to get crushed and fall to the floor. So,
right.
So that's some basics on squatting. And like I said before, we talked about the range of motion, that a lot of that transitions, or a lot of that translates over into other movements where you're pressing your legs. So not leg curls or leg extensions, but leg press, hack squat, even something like if you want to do like goblet squats, or
sure.
I mean, there's a bunch of different things you can do, obviously. So you're going to you can take away that foot position, and it's going to, like I said, it's going to translate. So the only thing that's going to be different is, now on any of these other movements, your upper body is taken out of it, because your back's against a pad of some sort. So now, the nice thing about any of the other movements is, now we can get a little more, which you can do this on squats, don't get me wrong, but you can get a little more specific in terms of different foot positions and different, width, toe positions, things like that. And you can target different areas of your leg if you want. So, now with that, I think it's also important to remember that in terms of the way you put pressure on your feet, it's still the same. Even if you're turning your toes in slightly, or I'm not going to say in, but even if you're straightening your toes completely, or you're turning them out more, you're still going to want equal pressure. You're probably still not going to be putting pressure on your toes, regardless. So, the cues they're relatively close to the same. But yeah, so toes out obviously is going to hit the inner part of the quad a little bit more, the VMO, so that teardrop head a little bit more. And then toes straight tends to hit the sweep a little bit more, in the medial, that medial head of the quad. And then, of course, like width of stance on things like hack squats and leg press, that little bit wider stance with your toes out is probably going to also bring in a little more hip involvement, and probably a little more adductor into the movement. And then, you can just kind of play around with it from there. But what are some of the things you like to do in terms of, leg press? Like, so I have a hack squat in the house, but I don't like it very much. It's part of, like, It's one of those like hack squat leg press combo machines.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I, I don't really like the hack squat, but the leg press is great. So I get super creative on that in terms of I can train both quads and hamstrings on that,
yep,
depending
absolutely.
on depending on foot position.
Yep,
And that's another thing. So I mentioned wide, and then the toes, and
yep,
then stance, but also how high or low your feet are on the
yep,
platform.
yep. And I hate those, and I do mean I hate those squats. Sorry, those leg presses that have such a narrow plate on them. Like they're it's
Yeah,
like basically you could maybe move a half of your foot up, and like there's no such thing as wide stance. It's just close stance, and that's really it. Like if your gym has nothing but that, I do feel bad for you. But yeah, doing the how overrated we'll say sumo or a little bit more narrow, toes turned out, higher leg press. How much that can hammer your hamstrings and glutes if you do it correctly. Holy smokes, man! It's especially being a very long like my inseam is a 38. I'm a very long femored guy. And so of that inseam, it's almost all femur. Like I have pretty relatively normal looking calves, we'll say, for someone of my height. But yeah, that was one of the ways I could dramatically overload my hamstrings and my adductors was to do that high and wide with toes turned out for sure. And like you don't need to go very deep for that range of motion either. You keep that kind of in a sweet spot there, and that's one of the favorite ways I like to use the leg press. And then also being able to have like because just where my femur length is so long that I do need to keep still feet a little bit higher on the platform, even though because for me that would still be where someone's most low feet were on the platform. But if not, then my heels do start lifting off, and that's not what I want at all.
right,
So but yeah, having that
right.
like it's so versatile, the leg press, right? Especially if you got one like you're talking about there with the nice big wide plate and tall plate.
That's it's. I mean, mine's kind of medium, I guess, in terms of the plate, but it also has the cool thing about it too is it also has I can adjust the angle of the foot plate.
Oh, see, that's
Uh,
perfect then. Yep.
there's like a little tab on it, but yeah. So I don't like I said I don't have a hack squat, so my leg press I can alternate. Like I'll do each leg workout. I have a rotating leg press exercise that I'll do. One workout will be a more hamstring focused leg press,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other will be a more quad focus. So with the quad focus, you're going to want your feet a little bit slightly lower on the platform and probably a little bit closer together. They don't have to be like touching or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but just in a little bit closer, shoulder width perhaps, or even inside. The only thing I'll see people sometimes. Well, if I put my feet in close, then my knees, my legs hit my body, right? So it limits the range of motion, and that's okay on a quad focus leg press because you don't need to go super deep. If I'm like burying it super deep where my lower back is starting to arch in there, I'm using mostly glutes and hamstrings at the bottom anyhow. So on that quad focus leg press, I am using slightly less range of motion, if that makes sense. I'm not going to come down. I'm going to come down pretty far, but I'm not going to come down, as far as I would on a little wider stance.
Sure, exactly. I'm agree with that too. Yeah.
So now the tricky part here is you do need to really control the eccentrics on this and on the way down, because this will tear up your knees if not. If you're doing a lower stance leg press, what's happening is if you look at the bottom angle, the knee is way over the toe, or it's at least a little over the toe at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be careful with this and make sure that you're actually like you're targeting the quads. And this is something that I like to do later in the workout when my quads are already like extremely blown up. And that way, as soon as I jump on there and start putting weight on there, it feels great. It's not something I'm going to do when my knees are not warm. I haven't done anything else. It would not be like a first exercise by any means. So, but yeah, I do those every workout. And I even have a past history. Like I have some torn cartilage in my knees, meniscus, and I don't notice anything. I feel fine as long as I'm warmed up, so that's another great way to use the leg press. And then you can replicate those on the hack squat as well. I think it's the hack squat and the leg press they're, as far as like foot placement and what you're going to get out of it, are relatively similar, I think.
Yep. I believe so. Yep.
Yeah, so it's just, obviously hack squat has your body a little more, your torso a little more vertical since you're not seated. But hack squats are hard to talk about though, because like leg press, there's so many different hack squats, and some of them are great, and
Just
some.
suck. Just flat out suck. Like I've seen some. Let's put it. I'll say this: the crappiest leg press I've ever seen still will beat the crappiest hack squat.
Oh, absolutely, because you can normally finagle a crappy leg press and make it
To
feel
do
pretty good, but
something.
some of the hack
That's right.
squats just can't. You can't do it. There's no way to
No.
get around it. So yeah, I do put hack squats in programming too, but there are some other ways to. Uh, One really easy thing you can do on a hack squat, if it has kind of an unforgiving angle. So, for example, the biggest complaint I see is, well, the hack squat hurts my knees,
Exactly.
and
Yep.
it's typically has to do with either the angle of the back where we actually are laying on the pad, or it has to do with the angle of the foot platform in the bottom, not putting you in a good range of motion. So a real easy way you can correct that, or at least mitigate that a little bit, is reverse band the hack squat.
Mm-hmm.
That helps a lot. It'll help with that knee tension at the bottom. So just tie a band from the top of the sled up to the frame of the hack squat in the back, and that way, obviously, at the bottom, it's taking off tension. And as you drive up through the movement, the weight gets heavier. Um, that's a good way to do it. That fixes a lot of shitty hack squats. Reverse banding them, you can reverse band them really really heavy if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You can you could have a really lousy hack squat and just put like heavy reverse banding on it, and it would feel a heck of a lot better
Yes,
in
I
most
agree.
cases.
Yeah.
So you can do that on a leg press, honestly. Like if you really wanted to, you could do it. You can also do it on a leg press. Some of them, just the sleds just don't feel, they just don't feel quite right. And some of them with like the really really huge heavy duty sleds sometimes feel a little awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, like I know, I'm trying to think where I was at. Oh, it was one of the elite FTS leg presses
Oh
they
yeah.
had.
Yeah. One of the
I think
big suckers. Yeah.
yeah, and this the sled weighed like 300 pounds, and you in the way that the sled was, it was one of the prototypes that they never put out. I
Okay.
don't think they actually put it out in the market. So the sled wasn't quite, didn't feel quite right. So you had to reverse band it. You had to. It just would feel awful if not. But with reverse bands on, it felt great. So yeah, you can do that on hack squats. You can do that on leg presses, and that's a good way to mitigate that. And I think I find that some of that has to do with people that have, it's going to be even more prominent, people that have like really poor ankle mobility. They're just, the bottom of that movement is just going to feel lousy, because the more your ankle's bending as you go down, it's just not going to feel good because your heel's going to start to lift. So that's where either you need to work on ankle mobility, or you need to get some raised heel shoes, or both. um I Some people are just, probably should always train with a raised heel shoe if they're going to do any kind of movement like that. You can say, oh, it's a crutch, you shouldn't use it, you should fix your ankle mobility, but I just don't think everyone's biomechanics will allow it. So you can
I'm
get a
with you
lot,
on that. Yep.
yeah, you can get a lot better range of motion and a lot more thorough activate, even just a lot better activation with that real raised heel shoe. Now, if you have good ankle mobility, it's probably not an issue. You just wear a flat shoe, you're gonna be fine.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you won't really need that, but yeah. So those are a couple things for leg presses and hack squats. Anything to add to
No,
those?
I know. Other than yeah, just knowing that we both covered it there, the wide versus narrow, toes versus this, and yeah, and the same things we said applied. Just like it doesn't, don't let your knees cave in. It's you still can, you still, and then obviously too, this goes for all the movements too, is especially on, so like the leg presses, don't lock your legs out in between reps, please. Like there are some really freaky Facebook and YouTube videos floating around where people actually have broken their femurs and things. It's not worth it to do that wacky quick jar lockout and unlock. It's just not friendly there. I call it going 7/8 the way up. You could probably do 9/10 or something, but just just keep it like that, because the way that I should have explained this too on a couple other exercises, that when you lock out and you kind of like take a deep breath and you unlock and you come back down, you go up, you lock and take a deep breath, you're not doing really one set of 10, you're doing really 10 sets of one. So, because that little breath, or like then especially once people start getting towards the end of a set and now they lock out, take 3 deep breaths, and they go and they lock, take 3 deep breaths, is like, that's not really part of the set. So, especially considering we're looking at predominantly bodybuilding here and physique alteration, we're not really looking at strength stuff here. So that's something to keep in mind. And then once again, especially especially if it's hard to see, get someone to video you, is not lifting your hips up off either the leg press, and I've seen more backgrounding on the leg press than anything else. But then on the hack squat, don't lift your hips up off the pad and shoot them out, trying to create a different angle. That can be really fun for your core and lower back.
Yeah, I like the though that's not necessarily a mechanics thing, the whole locking out thing. It is definitely relevant, because I know you can, like when you squat, especially if you're squatting, or doing leg movements, especially if you're doing anything over maybe 6 or 8 reps,
Mm-hmm.
you can drag that set out forever if you just keep
sure
pausing.
as hell can.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I know for me, I've had that years past. I would have that bad habit of doing it. It was just a freaking nervous system destroyer. You know what I mean? Because I could turn 12. Yeah, I could turn 12 into 20 if I really wanted, and had to. If there's more than like one pause in the set, then I'm like, that's it. That's it. Rack it.
Absolutely. One pause, and you want to squeak out, 2, 3, 4 more, and the pause is, a breath or something. Sure, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. But okay. So let's talk. So that covers quads pretty well, but obviously we can talk about some more
like leg extensions and things like
single joint movements. But I think why don't we cover another multi-joint movement, because a lot of people are going to want to hear about like doing hamstrings Romanian deadlifts, for example.
Yep.
And then we can talk about more single joint movements.
Sure. Yeah. So outside of obviously hack squat, and they should be, like, in my opinion, those should be some of the bases of your workouts, are like a hack squat if you have a decent one, a leg press, and a squat. And then I really do enjoy people doing forms of squats on the Smith. I really do. You can get really wacky with some foot placement, especially for someone like me with the long femurs. I can put my feet a little bit far out in front of me and then really target quads for me too. And you can do most things on a hack squat on a Smith anyways, just you're not going to have that angle to it, or it's going to be a little bit more different to get the foot placement on it. But I'm a big fan of that. I'm also there's actually a different I think Precor makes this machine. It's called a squat press, where it's like the machine you start in the leg press and it kind of comes down and it kind of does like a weird kind of arcing motion, and it feels really, really good for the most part. So it can kind of dip into more natural biomechanics than anything else. There's also some standing squat machines you can see that you can kind of go to the side and or whatever. You can kind of put like off balance things, and that would be doing more of the finesse stuff too. But there still are some decent compound standing leg press machines, I don't even know if I'd probably call them just standing squat machines or something like that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I call it it's like the V squat, like a hammer strength.
Exactly. Hammer strength V squat. Perfect. That's what I was looking for.
They make one, and then there's the there's another one I was thinking of. It was just on the top of my head. A pretty uncommon one. Oh, the pendulum squat. You've seen those too, where you where you lay back into it, and it has basically a big pendulum arm. Those are cool exercises. Just like, I mean, 1 in every 100 people will have one of those at their gym, though. So, it's not really.
No, it's not really.
I don't put that in programming ever unless they tell me they have it.
Yeah, exactly. If someone has a fancier gym, then Then also there's the horizontal plate loaded leg presses, which it's still falling under leg presses, but I feel it's worth bringing up that these leg presses are not only A, awkward to get into, B, usually don't have a heavy enough weight to outside of intermediates to use, but it's just be very careful with the getting in at the bottom proponent, because some of them don't have the right handles to get in. You'll see a lot of these in hotel gyms or even for like Planet Fitness or things like that. Sometimes they won't have the old school 45 degree where the weight's on your back leg press. So they can have some validity to them if you can get in and out of them fine. Like for me, I look like a friggin' clothespin going in and out of it, or a friggin' a paper clip. That's what I was trying to say, going in and out of them, and it can really do some numbers on my lower back. But if you've got a partner to kind of help you push it out, cool. But for the most part, and then I know they're a little bit wacky, but no, I was thinking of the pendulum squat. Never mind. Just you already took it, you bastard. All right, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead. What else do you find for compounds?
Cool. Yes, those are pretty cool. So there's a couple others. There's a couple others I do like. I think we give kind of honorable mention to use goblet squats at all in programs. Sure. So that's a good honorable mention, I think. Just because if those of you aren't familiar, goblet squat, you're basically holding a dumbbell up by your chest and you're doing a squat. So, the cool thing about that is it does distribute the weight a little bit differently, because the weight is, we talked about weight being in front of you versus weight being behind you. So it's like a hack squat it's like a front squat versus a back squat. Sure. But the difference in a goblet squat is it isn't so much like a front squat, because the foot placement is traditionally in a goblet squat, you're going to have a little bit wider foot placement. Now you could obviously do it with your feet closer. It would just be weird because the dumbbell would probably like hit your legs and, or just feel awkward. But yeah, goblet squat's a great movement especially for like quads, or for glutes and hamstrings and adductors and abductors. And then if you want to bring a little more quad into it, you can just bring your feet in a little bit closer, and it works great. It's free. That's easy movement you can do in any gym. If you don't want to sit there and wait on machines, it works. It also helps with your core. It's usually something that for a stronger person, I'm going to put it in like a superset or like a triset or giant set or something, because if you're really strong, you're going to be doing like a ridiculously heavy dumbbell, and the setup of it's just way too much of a pain. Getting the dumbbell up there. Now for someone that's maybe more of a beginner or not quite as strong, that could be something that you could do on its own by itself. Be pretty good movement to navigate through. I think we covered most of it. I know more hamstring dominant though is Romanian deadlift. That deserves its own little chat. I think.
Does. Yep, I agree with that. Yeah.
But
outside of that, we'll then quickly do for the multi lever stuff, like as in your split squats, your lunges, and the varying forms. Bulgarian split squats. What else? Those are they're magical exercises. If they don't think they're magical exercises, go watch John Meadows run you through some of his stuff where he's got like the Bulgarian split squats, or putting them at the proper placing in your workout. And they are, I really am not a big fan of any kind of lunging at the beginning of a workout, just because, like you said, with the goblet squat, it just can be way too much weight. It's way too much on the joints, especially even if you are warmed up. It's just safer to do them at the end where your quads and whatever else are already fried, and you can add them in. But of course, these are potentially, depending upon just like a squat, depending upon the closeness of the stance, how wide your foot is. If you're going to do a medial split squat, if you're going to do a double, like two hands on the dumbbell, or doing a barbell, it's going to change where you feel it. If it's not going to be just your quads, it's going to be your hams and your glutes as well. And then if you do them on a Smith or do them in a cage, so just I still would not recommend doing those, let alone at any kind of lower rep range, until you're at the end of a workout. And these are some of the most brutal things you can possibly do, because thanks to, for the main part, they're always double the set, because of you have to do each leg times whatever the reps. And that's just, not only are you tired and you're at the end of the workout, but they just seem like, especially I remember doing walking lunges with my buddy, and there was always a specific hallway we could go do them at, and that hallway just kept looking longer and longer after each set. And but my gosh, the development you can do with your legs and the muscles you can hit are just incredible on some of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You can get creative with not as much with lunges, because you're kind of set in like you just walk. That's about all you can do. But more so with like the more stationary movements, your split squats, Bulgarians, things like that. Those are a really good way to do like your different intensity techniques like cluster sets
Yeah.
and things like that, where you can alternate legs. So doing something like a cluster set of some type, or muscle round, which is just a cluster set. Um, it's brutal. And I like I like using that kind of stuff on those single leg movements, just because if I'm going to like just kill myself and do 15 or 20 on one leg, I just don't have the juice to do 15 or 20 on the other leg type of thing. So it's nice to do those cluster sets where I can do four right, four left, four right, four left, and then they're being trained equally back and forth type
Yep.
of thing. So, and that works really well. I That's kind of my only caveat on those single leg movements, is I don't really like to do super. I don't even want to say high rep. I want to say I don't even like to take one leg to like absolute failure before I train the other leg. I like to go back and forth on it, and then that way they kind of hit failure at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like or
Uh,
because yeah, some of the alternating stuff too. Like outside of you can't really alternate a Bulgarian split squat unless you do want to take that second in between and switch. Which yeah, that's a good thing to do too. But it can just completely then that leg is trying to hold the other leg up, and just it can get into a little bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, you can. So, and there's different ways you can do it. Even like a reverse lunge in place works good if you're doing, if you want to do something in place where your foot's not propped up. So, I mean, there's different ways you can do it. And within those, you have to play around with like the width of your stance, or how far your feet are apart, because a little bit closer feet together probably is going to be a little more quad focused. And if you have really big steps in between your lunges, you're probably going to feel your glutes and hamstrings a little bit more. So there's so many options there. It's just like weighted walking. I mean,
Yeah,
you can you can manipulate it quite a bit.
yeah, that's
Okay,
exactly it.
cool. So, all right. So Romanian deadlifts. This is a outside of squats and the debate between range of motion and all that good stuff. There's a several things that always get debated on Romanian deadlifts, and we don't even need to necessarily specify between like dumbbell and barbell. We'll just say, just for
Sure.
general sense, either one. Is a couple things. So how you'll get the crowd that does them very light, and they want to like really exaggerate the stretch or the eccentric portion. And there are a lot of people that do them very, very heavy too.
Hmm.
Now, um, couple things to think about. I personally, and this is just what I do personally, um, I've had success doing them heavy.
Yeah, me as
Uh,
well. Me as well. Yep.
yep. I've just gotten a lot of hamstring and glute development from doing them heavy. Um, Now, will you get some lower back activation when you do them heavy? Sure. You're going to get some, but you're also going to get some on squats when you do squats heavy. So that's just
Yeah.
how it goes. But uh, cues, like there's a couple things on actually, if you want to have good tension on there, is when you do them, knees should always be slightly unlocked. Um, and as you go down, you will kind of, I like to think of it as, instead of just leaning over the front, I'm also pushing my butt backwards. Uh,
Absolutely. I say exactly. Drift your hip backwards. Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
Sit out.
Yes.
Touch something with your butt.
Yep. So as your torso leans forward, you're also pushing your hips back. And of course, when you get down to the bottom, that is going to create a little more knee angle. So it's not a straight leg deadlift necessarily. It's going to have, you're going to have some knee angle at the bottom.
No, and
I'll
so I will take over here for a very quick second because I was
go
described
for it.
this in the perfect way. Is that there is such
Have
a
at
huge difference between stiff-legged deadlift and Romanian deadlift. The
Yeah.
Romanian deadlift is definitely much more of a bent knee, and exactly like what we're talking about here, where the hips are drifted out. Like if you see, it's still floating around. I know it will never go away, but if you see stiff-legged deadlift on your program, either on like so let's say you're getting on online, let's say you're getting from a coach or whoever, I would always ask and say, do you mean Romanian deadlifts or do you mean stiff-legged deadlifts? Which one are they? Because the stiff-legged is you literally have your legs locked out and it's for the lower back and it starts off the ground. That's the technical stiff-legged deadlift. It's none of this bastardized looking. It's something that was just carried over for whatever reason, that people look like your legs are stiff, but like, no, there is no part of the Romanian deadlift that is a stiff-legged deadlift, but the stiff-legged deadlift, it looks very awkward if you've ever seen one. It's like, and you have to be fairly strong to do it too. It's like, it's even a more straight up and down good morning, whereas the person will pick the barbell up off the ground out in front of them with their legs stiff, and it is entirely a lower back exercise. So it's not even supposed to be bringing in the glutes and hamstrings. So just really quick, that's all I'm going to say on that. That's the big difference. Back to you. Oh, did you run away for too long? Thought it was going to be a bigger rant than what it was.
I'm good.
That's all right.
No, I muted myself. I thought that was going to be quite the rant, so
No,
I'm back.
Yeah, it just, and I don't really have much to add to it other than that, because I could go on about like the dangers of it, of doing like a stiff-legged deadlift in the middle of a Romanian deadlift program or whatever, but just, or also too, people getting caught up in calling them like deadlifts. Like, no, the deadlift is completely different. That is off the ground, or potentially just it's a completely different movement. The Romanian is not using the back in ways it should at all. Like, yes, like Austin said, you are going to feel tension in the lower back, but you're not using your upper back at all for Romanian deadlifts.
You're right, and two, if you do an RDL correctly, even with heavy weight, you still shouldn't get a ton of lower back. No. I mean, it'll be some. You'll get some. I mean, if you're really pushing poundages, if you're strong and you're doing 3, 4, 5 plates, like something real crazy like that, yeah, you're going to feel it in your lower back. But it's not going to be that much. It's not going to be a ton, unless you, of course, like high rep stuff. Like I doing some sets of like 10 and 12. Yeah, it'll get pumped up a little bit more. But here's the difference too between, I think it's also important to think the difference between an actual deadlift and RDL, because you can pull an RDL off the floor if you really wanted. Like you could still get the same kind of hamstring and glute tension off the floor if you wanted to do it that way. I do have some people that like to like pull an RDL off a real low rack. And that's just what feels good to them. Now, the difference is in your hips and how you drive the weight up as well. So there's some different cues, like on a deadlift or a rack pull, you're typically wanting to, like, I don't know how you would want to say it, like get under the bar, like push your hips forward type of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas on a RDL, your hips are quite a bit more back. Your hips are going to be your butt's going to be a lot further back. Your body almost looks like a V. Like when you go down, your body almost looks like a V shape with that. And then, obviously a slight bend in your knees, and you'll feel it. And a lot of it's in the eccentric. A lot of setting yourself up for the proper concentric portion starts with the eccentric. So if you have that tension on the eccentric, a lot of it's just nervous system cueing and like brain cueing, like, okay, I'm lowering this weight with my hamstrings. And so when I come up, my hamstrings are already kind of doing their thing. Yeah. So if you're lowering it with your back, then your hamstrings aren't awake. They're probably not going to just randomly kick in as you start to pull the weight back up. So yeah, if you push your hips back and you feel that tension in your hamstrings and that stretch down, the bar should be pretty close to you still. It's going to be,
absolutely.
I know when I'm doing them pretty heavy, like I'll still like almost hit if I'm doing them real heavy, I'll almost hit my shins and my kneecaps when I'm pulling back up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's still close to your body. So that just goes to show how far back your hips are for that bar to be, that close to your body. So, yeah, I like I said, I hear that argument of doing them real light, and I just don't think that that's what that movement's for. Like, it's a great progressive overload movement. It's a great movement to get strong on and actually
what was
build
the argument,
some nice.
Sorry? What did they say it was for instead?
Like, using the eccentric portion is also important, right, for an RDL.
Of course.
The lowering. However,
they were saying it wasn't?
Well, no, I think that gets exaggerated, and people say that's their way of thinking that it should be a very, very light movement. Like they should just like just lower it super slowly and just feel the feel the stretch, which I think if they just get carried away with that, it's still a great movement to progressively overload.
Oh,
And
100%. I think if we're picking a compound, like, well, a movement for hamstrings, I think that's the number one in my books.
that's it. Honestly, like I know leg curls are fantastic if you know how to use them
Of
right.
course. Yep.
Uh, I don't even have a leg curl in my gym,
Yep.
and I can destroy my hamstrings with Romanian deadlift
Yep.
and my glutes too, of course. And then if I want to polish them off a little bit, I can do some of those high stance leg presses, like
Exactly.
we talked about.
Yep.
It's so the biggest thing right first is just getting the hips going back, and then obviously being able to activate the hamstrings. So again, depending on the person, it might not be something you want to do right out of the gate. Depends on how you feel. If you're good at getting that mind muscle connection, you might want to do something like a leg curl first. That might feel better for you. Now, me personally, I've done the RDLs so much that that can be my first exercise, and that's fine. They feel fine.
Yep.
That's actually what I do on one of the leg days. RDLs is literally my first exercise, and I do leg presses after.
Yeah. Sure.
Because yeah, so that way if my low back's a little bit tight, I can sit in the leg press. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
Type of thing. So yeah, I mean, fantastic movement. I think, like I said, my main takeaway there is don't think that that's a movement that is going to be a filler movement that you're going to do super light and just like feel the stretch on. You're really missing the boat. That's a fantastic movement to progressively overload. Even people with quote unquote, maybe even some like very temperamental lower backs, if they do a Romanian deadlift correctly, they can still load a good amount of weight on there.
Yeah. And so actually, perfect. We can move into cues on that one too, because I got a couple that I know that people
Cool.
either will A, feel it in their lower back too much, B, won't feel it in their hamstrings or their glutes, or C, they'll start getting like a weird lower back pump when they shouldn't. So some of the things that you can really set yourself up to do too is this is one of the ones where I would say, and the reason why people would say this during the exercise, which is look at the floor or look like not at yourself, is that when you crank your neck up just the exact same way that you do during a squat, like again, if it's fixed, it's fixed, and you're not doing like a chicken bob each time. That's much better than you that's way worse than you staring at the same spot the whole time. But I find if people, especially depending upon the mirror height and the dumbbell height in the rack, I found at one of the gyms I worked at that, especially for anyone underneath kind of 5'8", they almost had to like look above the dumbbells and would automatically put them in a hyper arch as opposed to a flat back. So that's obviously going to be causing a little bit too much tension on the lower back where it shouldn't go. And then the other really, like, and you kind of summed it up too. I actually like people keeping like shoulders or traps shrugged down so that the bar or the dumbbells are closer to their legs. As soon as they find them drifting, I think not only can you the potential to give yourself more lower back pain, creating too much of an angle there, but that's just not desirable at all, right? And then probably the biggest one would be kind of breaking it down. So when they do go down in the eccentric movement, is that when they're at the bottom, is that like you're of course, as soon as you watch from the side, as soon as the upper back starts rounding, well, that's going to be one of the first things you might pull up, or that's also going to lose integrity of the back, because I don't know if I heard either one of us mention this, but I really don't go much far past my kneecaps. I just can't, because as soon as I go past my kneecaps, either A, I will feel my lower back, B, I will round my upper back, C, I will round my hips, something will go. And that's not going to be a blanket thing for everybody, but for the most part, it's a really good, do you feel it here at your kneecaps? And they go, yeah. And then so it would be the other like, man, I've got quite a few cues on this, so I've seen such many, I'd say pretty poor Romanian deadlifts, but would be lead from the hips pushing forward, just like how you're drifting them back, as opposed to leading from your chest being lifted upwards. I find if people just think stand up with it, that they're going to go into hyperflexion there at the top, as opposed to just keeping their core braced and driving from their hips, and that's going to initiate them driving from the glutes and the hamstrings first, as opposed to potentially using their lower back. And then the last one would be is once they're at the bottom there, I find especially if people do sink too low, is that they'll almost start turning it into a squat as in now their hips will start going
Right.
down as opposed to going back, right? And you see this, right? We forget because,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think back to all the personal training stuff that I saw, and that would be it. Is that once your hips cannot drift out further back anymore, which is usually going to be around your hands at that kneecap region, you don't go further in the range of motion by dipping your hips down. Now, what are you doing? You're starting to load the quads, and now you're going to be able to do a more powerful, we'll call it bastardized Romanian deadlift, and now you're putting another muscle group in that you don't want to. And so yeah, those are it for me. Would be make sure you're not cranking your neck too far, make sure you're not leading from the chest and you're leading from your hips, and make sure your hips aren't traveling too far down.
Yeah. So just a couple little things to add. A good way to differentiate between like a rack pull and a deadlift and a RDL is you, if you look at people pulling heavy weights on deadlifts and like a rack pulls, for example, they almost always have a very slight round in their back.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a little bit of rounding, and that's okay. Not a lot, you know what I mean, but a little bit is okay. Whereas an RDL is a little more flat in the back.
Flat, yeah.
It's not hyperextended, like you mentioned. You don't want to have your back hyperextended and everything pinched backwards, but it's flat.
Yeah.
So
you have to think as soon as you round that lower back, you're effectively taking the hamstrings and you're kind of relaxing them, right? You stick your butt out, you're going to tighten, you're going to put more. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you want your lower back kind of locked in that straight position because you really don't want it. It's doing an isometric contraction, I guess, if you want to call it that, because it's still doing something, but it's not like you don't want it moving out of that. You want to be kind of locked in there. And then like a good starting cue, and this is also true for a squat a lot of the time, is you want to break with the hips first. Did you say that? Did you mention that?
Yes, exactly. Just as in like, yeah, just make sure that you're not pulling from the chest at the bottom first. You're pulling from pushing from the hips first.
So even at the top. So even like when you're doing the
absolutely break from the hips first. Yes, I completely agree. Yep.
Yeah. So both squat, we should have mentioned that on a squat too. Both squat and RDL, and when you're straight up and down, your hips are going to go before your knees start to bend. Your hips, you should always break at the hips just slightly before the knees bend. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to like push your butt way back and then start bending your knees, but it should be always break at the hips just a little bit. And that's tremendously helpful on squat for people where their knees track too far forward.
Yep.
If they think about that and they break with their hips and push their butt back a little bit at the beginning, then their actual knee position and their hip position is so much better. So break with the hips first on those, bend the knees a little bit. Yeah, that's a good movement. That's one of my favorite movements. I love doing RDLs.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because I'm like relatively good at them. You always like doing stuff that you're good at.
I only did it was finally something because I always loved training legs and just was not able to get my squat great thanks to that super long femur. Like I look really funny doing a squat, Austin. I love it. It's one of my favorite movements, but for whatever reason, I developed really powerful ass and hamstring, so I love doing them, but it did it. I don't know if I could do the amount of machines or leg curls or anything else to develop even the hypertrophy, let alone the strength, as the same as it was. And yeah, they were damn fun. I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, it's a great movement, and then there's just something about a nice meaty hamstring that hangs from the side.
Yep. There's something about a meaty hamstring. It's
again, I'm biased because that's one of my stronger suits, but it just kills me when you got this big upper body and then the guy turns to the side and they've got a flat hamstring. That I die inside.
Yeah.
I just die.
It just looks really fun, especially if they've got decently developed quads. It just looks really funny.
Oh, it kills me. And ladies.
It's super funny too, isn't it? Yeah.
You guys,
go ahead.
Girls, all these girls want glutes on stage, and it's like, well, once you lose all the fat on top of your glutes, you got to have muscle there to see it. Like RDLs, that's a big one.
Yeah, exactly. Because nothing like will. Something. I don't think anything will target the top of the glutes quite like keeping that like a properly positioned Yeah, it just works a heck of a lot better. And then it immediately came to my mind about like the whole seeing really big quads without a really big without a hamstring to match is like seeing like a really big bicep without a tricep. Just looks super funny. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah. So that's most of the compound movements, I think. Besides some of the different variations, like I said, there's different ways you can like 10, 15, 20 different bars that you could squat with. And
Yep.
I mean, there's some other lesser used movements that you could add in there, like good mornings, for example.
Yeah.
But that's a little more lower. It's going to do a lot of lower back too with the hamstrings.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else you want to add?
For the compound one, no, not really. I'm trying to think other than that the leg press, right? I really like leg press high and wide for hamstrings, and I also do like, and it is, you're not going to completely obliterate getting out quads of this one too, but like a sumo Smith machine. So like
Mm-hmm.
feet fairly far wide, about 45-degree angles on the feet, and then I really ram through the heels on this one, not the midfoot or the toe. And I especially for people like myself, I do like to put my feet a little bit further out in front of me, almost so like I'm resting on the bar a bit, because I like having it so like when I'm at the bottom, my torso is straight up and down, and my shins are straight up and down. I don't have any kind of uh, angle towards either of them. And I find if I shove my knees out, of course I am going to hit some more of the adductor as well. But I do find that can really, and you can find a kind of a sweet spot. It's kind of about like, we'll say 60% of the way down, then coming up to about less than 30% of the way from the top. You can just kind of hover in that range, and just, man, you find a groove, and it can start roasting exactly where you're looking for there. So, and then it's not you could maybe call it a compound if you wanted to do the no, I wouldn't really, because I would use the dumbbell, but like where you kind of put your feet. But it is, again, it's another variation of the Romanian. See, everything's coming back to that big ass bastard Romanian deadlift, but kind of standing
Yeah.
on in between two benches with one dumbbell and having your feet turned out and kind of dropping down and using your hips to come up for that. That's a good one for the glutes and the hamstring as well. But again, it's just another variation of the, because I think I might even call it kettlebell slams or something like that. But yeah, they're pretty much that's pretty much where I'm topped out too.
Yep. Trying to think. I was thinking of belt squats too, but
Yeah,
hardly anyone
I
has a
was
belt
thinking of
squat.
those. You know, funny enough, I was thinking of those too. But it's like not only not a lot of people have the belt. B, set up. Yeah,
Yeah. I funny enough, I think that might be my next purchase for my
I
gym
think that'd be a
outside.
great one. Yeah,
Because those are pretty cool too, because you can like do rows and all kinds of shit from the
yeah,
cable
yeah,
connected to the floor.
yeah.
So might have to I'll be the only place in Central Ohio that has a belt squat.
Hey, there you go. You can even put that on the front of the barn gym. Be like the only place Central Ohio with the belt squat.
Yeah.
Yeah, home of the Central Ohio belt squat. That's perfect. There you go. Yeah,
There you go. There you go. Yeah, cool.
yeah. So, do you want to do some of the finesse guys, or that's kind of, or what do you think for
Let's
hamstrings?
let's just cut, let's just cut it off here, and then
Okay,
you
perfect.
can just like, yeah, just splice it out here,
Okay,
and
perfect.
then that way we'll just come back on. We'll come back on next time. I won't even intro it. I'll literally just start with, okay, let's talk about some single joint movements.
Okay, perfect. So
You know
one
what I mean?
right away.
That
Yep.
way it will just slap these two together, and you won't really need to edit that much that way.
No, I'll just do an outro really quick here, and then I'll just splice it, and then that'll be great for this one. Okay, hold on one sec.
Do you want to splice these two together as one, or do you want to make them?
No, be two different ones. Like I just mean like the last minute
Oh,
here. That's it. Yep. Like
okay.
I don't even
Okay.
know what to say. So I don't know. Well, that concludes quads and hamstrings for our body part exercise vault sessions, and we will catch you next time doing glutes and we'll say other ancillary things like adductors.